Hello. One cannot be and have been. One cannot spoon-feed to a student artistry. One can organize the details, but at the same time one has to steer the ship in a direction while cleaning on the ship. So for a teacher to expect the detail and the completion at the same time, to think within and outside of the box at the same time, to inspire and be rigorous, but not instead while at the same time, it's a challenge. Because there is necessary a structure, and that structure is the rail. For instance, take an example, Schumann's fantasy middle section called Legenden To, the legend, storytelling, epic storytelling, evocative of something ancient, starts like a chorale. And because it's a fantasy, the thought process of somebody inside in the psyche, as if you visit the inner world where you don't complete sentences to yourself, you think, you interrupt, you feel, you sense, you fear, you hope, and all these things become some kind of a soup in which you bathe in some kind of anxiety or sadness or hope or profound nostalgia, in the case of this evocation. And then after the first chords, which are empty of chords, in fact skeletons of chords, which are the octaves, remain no major or minor, almost sensually emptied, and the theme appears in the heart inside. Emotional chords, like half-diminished sevenths, filled with expression, emotion, and regret for the triton as well as for the leading tone, compared to the opening that was almost like a Gregorian chant, with the hope ascending. Going to the leading tones of the relative major hope, and returning in minor in the realization of one's condition. After all, without to be cheaply philosophizing, the fact is that we open our eyes and we are in the middle of a ride, allegorically speaking. Would it be train or tram or something? And so we don't know where it started, we don't know where it's going, and we'll never do, because we'll be dropped before the next few stations, but that even we don't know when. And so we try to make sense of what we observe around, of the people and the places, the soundscapes in music obviously, but really in the allegory would be the landscapes, of course, and the awareness of who we are, where we are, around where and whom, and from where we go to what to do, and what is our purpose, and all these meanings. So, of course, we can be spoon-fed that by religion or education, and both, perhaps with ideology, or just with success and expectation, and as a student to not disappoint the parents or the teacher, and so it becomes a journey of imitation and self-discovery. And in a way, all of these elements represent, I think, the bread and food of the interpretation of a piece for a pianist. After all, it is a journey which is not ours, it's Schumann's fantasy, becomes ours during the day of the moment of the life that we have our eye of the beholder over it, saying, oh, it means to me, oh, it reminds me of my own sorrow or hope or love. And at the same time you associate to it the fact that you have to organize yourself how to play it, because there are keys that are ready to be played wrongly, and you try to avoid them. So by the time you only organize the industry of playing it, you're not so connected to how you organize your phrase. And if the teacher says, play rhythmical, play with the counting loud voice or the metronome, and then but play free because artistic means telling it yourself as a translator in the sense of interpretation, the interpret of the thoughts of the composer, of what is perceived to be the thoughts of the composer, since the dead scores, notes don't speak by themselves unless you all of a sudden put the pitches, rhythms, expressions, lines, pedals, directions. And after the first stanza, he restarts a second serving, but this time with a decorative accompaniment. Are like the next day. It's the same as the day before, but is no more. And the performance is going to be different from the practiced rehearsal days, because you repeat, but then at the moment of the performance you deal with the unexpected. And it's always different, because the people who are there bring you vibes that perhaps aren't negative or positive or both. You feel you don't want to fail because you have one chance. Of course, in the learning process, you have many chances. In rehearsing, that means rehear, so you repeat and you replay, and every day you compare to the last, and the piano and the studio and the practice room and all the elements. But then you learn the notes, you know how to play it, you go through it, you memorize it, you pass a jury, an exam, an audition, you enter a school, you leave it and you practice it for another exam or another concert and another competition, and it becomes a friend who comes back in your life. And after the second or third revisitation, you start feeling like you understand better outside of the box where you're going while you're going through it. Then perhaps one day you record it and you make many takes, and you have a tone engineer and a director, artistic director, who gives you advice how to go through what. It's the balance, the phrasing, the legato, the singing, the organization, the tempo keeping, because when you edit a lot of takes, they have to be compatible, so you have to have a certain sense of motoric knowledge, but then you really know it more in depth after you have first learned it and then render it through the recording, so you even more deeply involved in the details, while the completion of it is in the editing. And then you teach it. Not always and then, sometimes in between, but just for the purpose of the demonstration of the seasons of life with one's piece, comes the point where you teach it, and then all of a sudden is confronted to the fact that you leave it by proxy. You don't have the remote control on the student, and you give your examples that correspond to your tip of the iceberg of the, again, allegory of your own experience, but then it cannot be cloned on the student's one, because from the morphology of the hands, arms, and everything, to the psychology of their understanding of sense of pain or sense of nostalgia or sense of happiness, different elements which, even if the piece dictates them in the notes or between the notes with the values, and then perhaps the psychological breathing about which I would like to speak, because this is the ultimate element of humanity that you inject in the storytelling of the piece, as it was meant by the composer and the publishers and the recordings and the knowledge about that it's accumulated for the last century by scholars. But it's still you playing at this point through the student, earlier through the recording director, and earlier through the teacher when you are learning the notes. And so your journey goes from discovery to rediscovery to internalization, and then externalization through the student, whose own path brings him or her to play it in a different branch of the path and goes differently towards the same point. More ritenuto, less ritenuto. Should I not? Accelerando or not? Too early? Should I change the color before the theme changes the color? Should I merge in traffic? Where do I put the pedal? Left pedal? No? Yes? Which colors? How do I want to organize the layering? What is the meaning? And so if you explain and spoon feed it by saying, yes, just ritenuto 2 before 1 and then organize this and there, all this is possible, but then at the end of the day, the student leaves the room and the teacher remains with more questions. At least I do. Like a philosopher answering with questions. And when I go from the empty opening to the accompanied melodic and harmonization with the... and then... as a teacher, I like to say, what if he had continued in this energy that he had built? You don't go as far as me in my creative imagination to what it could have become if it had blossomed to where it was directing us in terms of the silent almost opening to the very emotional. And because perhaps it's a fantasy, that means sort of passing thoughts inside the psyche at different levels of awareness, perhaps subconscious. Schumann, at the moment of the intensity, interrupts and another thought comes by, unrelated except thematically, but that's for musicologists, and for the meaning, because it's the same theme. But nevertheless, all of a sudden it's D flat major out of nowhere. And you have to act in front of the performing situation because, of course, the audience is... The music lovers like to be told the story, but the professionals who will judge you know the story. So you have to act artificially because of art, but still spontaneously surprised. Oh my God, what is this incredible land? I could have lived here and would have been much happier. Solace after the Legendenton soulful but painful expression of perhaps some distant song. So the way you introduce this parenthesis in music is unbelievable because you're... So some people could take more time and say, please take the time to transition to this new mood. Or some people will say, oh no, this is too lacking the spontaneity that has to be structurally organized, as we call subito, immediately. Or the new color before, and then kicking in after you establish the new harmony for the distant daydream color, or just at once dropping in a way like a cliff or a piece that doesn't fit in the puzzle. In a musical sense, playing that section of daydreaming, like as if you hold your breath under the water, seeing something fantastic and real. Oh my God, what is this? Landscapes, smells, I don't know, something unreal, which exits on the other end of that parenthesis in action again after this moment of non-action. So the opening theme thematically of the ascending fourth becomes this dotted rhythm of energy of search for the nonsense. Where am I going? What's happening? As if Schumann in this section suggests psychologically this sense of unsettled search for the for that absolute that we don't know what it is. But then how much is it at once faster? Of course it's energized, but is it little by little? Like a steam engine locomotive, or at once? Like awakening from the daydream with a shake, or of the soul or the body, even like, oh my god, I'm startled. Descending chromatic scale brings us. Now we sing the theme large and in sixths, like in the beginning. The minor six is emotion. The perfect fourth was just evocation of something without major or minor, and then it could have been it's minor. Obviously in the romantic music the minor is associated to tragic, to desperate, to sad, to profoundly, soulfully expressing the experience of life. Again, my analogy with the trip, and by the time you finish experimenting how you're going to transition, because the devil is in the detail, as they say when you read texts. Sometimes the devil in interpretation is in the transition, beyond the themes and the beauty of the mood that you create, or it's created by the composer through you. It's that you realize more clearly how the transitions fit into the whole structure while living so intensely, as if you always rediscover the same new day's variation of the last day after so many days, and you're so happy to see the sun rise again and not be the last one you've seen before the sunset, because you might fall asleep and never wake up at some point, inevitably, hopefully not think of it, but it is some kind of ravishment to see the new day arrive. The hope to do it better, to do better this day, whatever task or whatever thing we give to ourselves to reach, and sometimes to doubt. And I find that when you put in parallel a life's journey with a music journey of the composer's thought through your life, this allegory becomes a beautiful mirror of your soulful experience. Of course, in daily life you're taken in the actions, the children, the students, the parents, the country, the organization, the success, the survival, the nourishment, the sleeping, the loving, the rejecting, the rejection, the hope. And sometimes all of these are elevated in a novel at the level where we can associate our little part of humanity within this epic description of it. And would it be in a symphony, a fantasy, a sonata, a film, a book, painting, or just a quote, or dear memories of people who were meaningful to us. And all that comes to an end, and at some point you realize that every time you go through that section you live it differently, not because you're just capricious, or nor either because you're going to be such an organized performer with a good teacher and a student who's obedient that you lock all the bolts in place so you always play the same way. And these thoughts come to me not only today, but they carry inside me when I try to be perceptive of the students' angst to do well, beyond to not disappoint themselves, while they have to perform under pressure because it's a deadline, a jury, a tuition, parents, their stage of life brings them to the next stage of life. As I like to say, students are boats, teachers are docks. And so during that time they're docked, I try to transmit them, of course, like all teachers, my experience. But my experience of the piece cannot be theirs, because they're still at the level where they are responding to all the details in their playing, so they have to not forget this, not forget to organize that for the memory, and don't forget that second time it changes at this point. So you organize your map GPS in your mind, and you go on your long ride. And no matter how much you plan to have enough gas and food and everything, the unexpected happens, and then you deal with it because of the experience. How can you have that experience before you've acquired it? Which goes back to the beginning of my sentence: you cannot live and have lived. Therefore, you cannot have an interpretation and have had it before in order to go directly to the point, which usually happens even with composers. They seduce and organize and present their music through a form of a sort, and then when they are very old or later in their composer's life, their aesthetics is just to go to the essential without even an introduction or a conclusion in the form, just the essence. And somehow I think it happens with us too, when we get at the end of the cycle of the piece, for our life is the transmission, and then beyond that we realize that the student performs it with some intuitive, perhaps some conscious wisdom that we acquired only through our own path. And I think it's humbling. At least I consider it so. If I'm a jury member and a lesson teacher who I love to teach rather than to judge, because it's always hopeful that we can find a solution to play better for the student what I think or they would like to hope the composer wanted. And then when you judge, it's always eliminate, it's always by the negative rather than by the positive. In other words, you teach for a potential to develop, and you judge a reality that you sense is there, but that reality will evolve with the student or the artist, who won't be the same in some next revisitation of the piece. And so it's a path, and everybody tries to make sense of it. And I like to hope that I can bring the students to live fully their own blossoming of the meaning of it, because beyond what the teacher said, the audition judge said, the publisher said, and everybody else said, you're alone facing the mirror of your soul with the piece. What does it mean to me? And you only can be believable in your storytelling, regardless if it's for professionals or people who just want to love what you play, because they don't know it. And in a way they would be satisfied with lesser details. But that doesn't mean that you don't raise more your expectations anyway, because you want to do it the best for yourself and what you think is the meaning of it, which is played at the best, regardless for whom, at that point. And then you reach that point and you think, perhaps this child prodigy or this young person already understood more than I ever did through all my life experiences, because that's how it was. We are having different perception capacities, different influences that came to us at different moments. What if I had learned it earlier? What if I had understood it differently? What if, what if, what if? And then that's the uncontrollable part. We don't choose when and where and from where to where. But during, we do. And so during, we're passionate and we transmit to the audience or to the student or to the microphone or together. And it's a different way of sharing it, even if you write an article over it or publish an edition of it, in a different, more indirect way that way. Or you compose your own, in which case you start a complete new ecosystem which is unrelated to the performance of the one in question. Even if you can use, as me, the tool of divagation and say, oh, that he could have gone... And then you say, thankfully he didn't, and he interrupted it with another thought which makes it more modern even today. Hear something that unbelievably comes out of nowhere. So sometimes the composers purposely don't make a transition to surprise with that second level of awareness, like daydream I call it. People can call it. I mean, people anyway call what they want. But anyway, they don't speak it when they play, thankfully, like I just did. They just go from... It seems like the unity is the melodic theme that is transformed with different moods, almost like psychological variations on a legenden tone that brings you to the brink and to the drops and emotional roller coastering, but not only, daydreaming at the secondary level. And all these suggestive things are so subtle that a hint is an exaggeration, and then the rubato, il ritenuto, accelerando, subito, prepared or surprised, anticipated, or counterintuitive, unconnected, fragmented by essence as a fantasy is sort of like the interrupted thoughts at different levels of consciousness that are translated through the psychological harmonization or melodization, translation of these moods that are inside us, that emotional soup. But not only, also thoughtful soup, organized soup through purposeful rhythmic and pulse, and especially, I think, very interestingly so, meaning different things to different people. Not everybody in different cultures also, but not only within the cultures, the individuals are better than the cultures because they are, by their individuality, the meaning of the world, in the plurality of it. Every flower looks like another except to each other, and we think of it only when we analyze and study something. If not, we associate things. That's how racism happens. We just say these people that, or these animals this, but each is an individual, a soul, a being. We attribute the meanings, but I don't think we should, and we do, and they perhaps wisely don't, especially the animals. They just go through their cycles. But regardless, I don't even know what they go through, and perhaps we shouldn't touch at that now because it makes no sense to just divagate as I do. But the bringing us back to the thought is that if the melodic line is a theme, the way it's treated is through different life experiences that are hinted, and because people who hear it don't live at the same level because of that, these experiences between sorrow, loss, hope, expectation, or a capacity to just go through things without to be overly marked, that helps too to understand that therefore the performer will taint the emotions that are clearly or sometimes more subtly hinted by the composer on the paper and revealed by the teacher or the recording and again the publisher and all. With their own sense, I would like to say, psychological funnel. And then it comes out more or less standard because of the editions and the schools and the... I mean, there are certain things, obviously, that sort of unify everything. But that look-alikeness stops beyond the wrong note, which is what, at the first level, the student is worried about. And should be, since we have, as teachers, to encourage perfection seeking rather than obsession, but it becomes such when the student is obliged to organize the details and play on an unknown instrument as well as possible. For pianists it's a challenge, and I know that is a natural angst, I don't belittle it, but I guess the capacity to learn enough touch control allows you to more or less, let's say, navigate without as much fear. But you'll never be 100% in charge of everything of your intentions to become reality. And when they're more than less, you become a little bit more confident. Perhaps in an ironic way, you're ready to play it perfectly well when you're physically a ruin, but you've accumulated a lifetime of wisdom through playing it, teaching it, and learning it even from your own students. Well, perhaps that's a little bit of a exaggeration to say, but there must be a point where you end up by playing it as well as you always ever would be, while at the trajectory which allows you still to have the capacity to progress. My teacher always said, words without thought never to heaven go, quoting Shakespeare, because it's exactly that. You repeat things that perhaps mechanically can be recited, but if you put the meaning to them, every time you recite them, they become more and more deep grooves in your soul. And somehow then they touch some other thoughts, and all of a sudden it's more revealed than just told, because it's absorbed, it's interiorized, you understand it. And then when you play it, you're believable, not just because you say through your playing what you're told to do, but because what you do represents, in fact, through the text of the composer, what you want to say, without to improvise or recompose it. Yeah, it becomes your own during that journey. Tu verras, mon petit Émile, tout le long de ta vie, ces morceaux seront tes compagnons. Mademoiselle Boulanger was telling me that often. You will see one day, my little Emile, all these pieces of music will be your companions through your life journey. She said that to a child, and I took it at the level of the child understanding psyche of the world, which is as beautifully, as untaintedly, not only hopeful, but naturally hopeful, and it should be so. You're immortal when you're young in the fact that you endeavor, and when you get older you're cautious because you've been bumped by life or yourself into it, and that shouldn't stop the spontaneity. And when you transmit your knowledge to a student, you shouldn't inhibit them from expressing their spontaneity without to ask for them to just spend the time to learn by their own mistakes. You can also shortcut some situations with a fingering arrangement and bring them closer to that essence that they're supposed to reach for themselves, in any case, and by themselves. And that's to respect them and not to clone them naturally. Thank you.